right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on the Blowback Roundtable. I'm Billy Bob. I am in the West Coast. It is morning for me. Over here on the right, we got Mr. Wouter Peeters. He is live from Brussels, Belgium. Is that correct?
It's quite close to Brussels, so yeah, that's true.
Quite close to Brussels. And then Ian
Yeah.
Kummer is quite close to Moscow. Is it the Moscow suburbs?
Yes, the Moscow suburbs.
Okay.
And we have Ben Toth coming from, I can't ever say the name of the city you're in. Peach.
Page. Try something like
Page.
Page, Southwest Hungary. Yeah.
All right. So we are all over the place here. The biggest news and the name of the title of our program today is the 4-hour Putin marathon, because yesterday he gave one of his tremendous 4-hour-long Q&A sessions. Totally extemporaneous. I'm certain the questions were just random. It's like, Western press conferences are always scripted. The questions are scripted. The answers are scripted. And you don't really learn anything ever. That's just not how it is with you when you have real leadership. So that's, to me, one of the biggest differences in how things operate. But so we can talk about that. I'd like to hear everyone's opinion on how they think it went, what were the biggest takeaways. And I want to start with Ben, because Ben always has some tremendous insights.
Well, I took a bunch of notes. He had a lot of stuff to say. I'm wondering if we should pick one out, but a couple of things that stood out to me. Obviously, he addressed the special military operation, Ukraine, and he absolutely stated without any room for gray speech, the goals have not changed. Denazification, demilitarization, and neutral status for Ukraine. So that puts all the Western talk about we're going to have some peace negotiations, maybe a Korean scenario, split Ukraine in half, put half of it in NATO. That's dead. That's gone. That was interesting. He talked about the Russian not recruitment drive, but the military. Like there was the limited operation, limited mobilization, 2022 mid-year, like 300,000. Right. And he said there's not going to be a second wave. We had around 600,000 people working at all levels in the zone. There's 1,500 people volunteering every day. We don't have issues of that kind.
Can I pause you on that, Ben? Because I want to touch on that.
Maybe pause here.
I want to ask Ian. So I've heard that the wages have been tremendously increased. I hear people saying, jaw dropping, talking about how much Russian service people are being paid, and how, they snidely comment like, Putin is bribing people to go and die, kind of a spin on things. Can you quantify for us, help us understand, like, how much did the wages go up? Like, is it really, are they really getting paid like private mercenaries, or any insights on that, Ian?
Well, so the publicly available figures are 200 to 300,000 rubles a month, depending on, your rank and your job, and you're in the SMO zone. And there's also signing bonuses, which can apparently be up to 600,000 rubles when you sign up, which is very good. So 200,000, 300,000 puts that serviceman on par with, I would say middle class or upper middle class person in Russia, white collar worker. So it is generous. It's very good. I would say per capita implied exchange rate, it's pretty close to what American service members get when they go to combat zones. So it's pretty equivalent.
Okay.
And was it like 100? Go ahead.
And let's not forget, if you take out Leopard 2, like a German tank, that you're pretty much set for life, because those things have bounties on them from business people, I think, right?
Right. So you can buy, I don't know, I wouldn't say set for life, but you definitely have enough to buy a nice car afterwards.
A handsome payout.
Yes.
Oh, that's very interesting. So there's incentives, job performance incentives. But I'm curious as far as the increase, like before, like what the wages were like a couple years ago and now. I mean, did they like double? Did they more than double?
I'm not the person to ask about that. It's hard to say because the pay scales for American servicemen are publicly available. but it's confusing, like everything else in Russian bureaucracy. Like you look up the pay rates for different people, and it's confusing because it's just the base pay. It's not counting your allowances and all the other things that get tacked onto your paycheck. So, but yes, I would say I don't know if it's necessarily double or triple, but it's a significant increase from what people in peacetime, or people now in peacetime in Russia doing their military services. I would say it's a significant increase for sure.
The West will cynically claim that that's what you need to do to induce people to come, since 500 million casualties, right? There's been 500 million.
500 million, yes. It goes up about 1 million every day. But I mean, it's combat pay, and everybody does the same thing. It's when you go to combat, there's more risk. And it's a real war. Not fighting people in sandals who can't shoot back. And it's a real war. There's a significant chance you'll be hurt or killed in a war like this. So yes, it's significant. Yes.
To just have a ballpark figure, a regular wage, 234. When you go.
You mean for like an average wage or average Russian? So the average wage of a Russian is around, I would say, 70 to 90,000 rubles a month. That's just the average wage. And in Moscow, it's a bit higher. It's about 110,000 rubles average. Now, I would say that's a bit of an understatement because Russia has a much larger gray economy than Western countries because Russians just hate taxes. So I would so it's estimated about 20 to 30% of the Russian economy is unreported. People who's not paying. So it's actually big. Wow. So that average wage is probably actually a bit higher when you count people who are just, not doing due diligence to report their income. So
when it comes to the economy in general, he's defied all the expectations of, GDP growth. I think we're at about 3% this entire year, something like that, going from -2 by the IMF going to +3. So it's really outperforming everyone's expectations. But he did talk about the federal minimum wage, which apparently has gone up 60% since February 2022. And it's on scale for, I forgot, but another hike, 30-40%. I'm not sure. So that's a good measurement too, even though you said like 1/3 of the jobs are unreported. That's the federal minimum wage. That's what everybody at the entry level gets. That's a good indicator. And I'd like to pick one more thing out when it comes to the economy. All of the headlines before this thing in the West was about, and you can tell us about this, egg apocalypse. The egg prices have gone up in Russia so bad, this is the collapse. And one old age pensioner, an old lady, a babushka, phoned in, hey, the eggs, it's really difficult. And what do you say to this? And you never see this from Joe Biden or anybody else. He said, my apologies. This has been a shortcoming of the government, even though some people say it's not. And I will do my best to fix that situation as soon as possible. Was one of my favorite moments. I wish I had a clip, but I don't. So economy.
Yeah, so I don't actually know the cause of that. I am aware that there have been complaints about the egg prices in particular. Russians do apparently like their eggs very much. So while Russia is a net food exporter, eggs apparently not one of them. They consume more eggs than they export, and apparently, particularly Turkey, they've exported eggs from. So, well, I mean, we have, at the very least, local and regional shortages in the USA. Every time there's like avian bird flu and you have to slaughter a large number of chickens. Sometimes, those disease outbreaks can cause millions of livestock to be slaughtered. They're a very big deal. So things like that can happen. Or there's people consume more than they're producing. There's any number of reasons for it. But, just the fact they're complaining about egg prices and, the ceiling isn't falling in like people were like Western experts were predicting back in February and March of 2022. And all throughout the special military operation, as the economy is going to blow up any second. So, if egg prices are the worst thing happening, then I'd say they're doing pretty good. And to touch on, Ben, what you said about wages, so he also says that there has been significant inflation this year. 8% is the figure given, which I don't think is a huge surprise because there's a lot more rubles being used. There's more rubles in circulation now. They're used in more transactions when you're printing that much cash and using it that much more. There's always a risk of inflation. But he did also say that average wages, not just the government hiking the minimum wage, but the average wages as all have apparently are on par with inflation increase or higher. So doesn't
And it's an
look-
honest inflation number, because nobody
Yes.
believes the, I think 6% reported in the US when you actually look at grocery prices and stuff. And I looked at some Russian Telegram and Twitter X accounts, and they said, oh my God, $1.2 for a dozen of eggs. That's converted. That's the egg the egg apocalypse that the West kept talking about. Seriously, the US press was full of this. This is the end.
Putin did say that was one of his favorite sources of protein, was the egg. And yeah, he said he was definitely going to do something about it. And I love that she had like purple bluish hair, and she was complaining about chicken breast prices, egg prices. And you don't see that in the West. You don't see regular people. And I believe, Putin was very believable when he was taking it seriously, and he said, hey, we're gonna deal with this. We're gonna do something about it. So I mean, it was good. It was good optics. I'm sure Putin will not have much of an issue getting reelected. But you were continuing. You were going through his speech. So what other?
Yeah, we're talking about re-election. Nobody in Russia has any idea who this liberal, whatever girl is. Some reporter somewhere who is running against Putin, and the West has picked it up as mother of three going against the dictator and all that. And it's just like nobody even recognizes her. I just wanted to say on the topic of the economy that everybody's favorite, end of history guy, Francis Fukuyama, I thought that was worth framing, put on Twitter that Russia is heading for an even bigger collapse in the coming days. This coincided with the 4-hour Putin speech. In the West, we also had some other
in the coming days, literally days.
Let me find the actual quote.
I meant to go to the tweet to see exactly what people were saying about it, and I didn't get a chance. But yeah, I don't know what he's referencing, and then if people were just laughing at him or what.
A much bigger Russian collapse will unfold in the coming days.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's as far as the Russian economy went. The West is just saying he's running it too hot, whatever that means. But, I think that's doing fine. He talked about Europe and basically the friendship there, which is pretty much gone. He said they have zero sovereignty. Some people, they're not pro-Russians, and he picked out Orban and Fico, the Slovakian prime minister, the Hungarian prime minister, as being pro of their own people, pro-sovereignty, but they're not pro-Russia in any way. But everybody else, and I love this, he said they pretend to be Charles de Gaulle, where in reality they are Pétain, who was the Nazi collaborator, leader of France. And it's absolutely true. As long as there is no representation for the actual interests of the people in Europe, we don't see any reason to talk to these people. So I thought that was something noteworthy. Other topics include, he talked about the Olympics. He talked about the friendship with China. Let's see what else he did. The energy crisis, that's not our problem anymore. We didn't do this. We don't use oil as a weapon. Scholz said the Russians stopped the flow. No, because the Yama-Europe pipeline was stopped by Poland. The Druzhba pipeline was stopped by Ukraine. And Nord Stream was most likely blown up with the US or paid someone else to do it. Outspoken like that, and I really love that he's not. I mean, this isn't the same as who's that guy, Cy Hirsch's thing. This is from the president of Russia, leaving no gray zones. It's just that's likely what happened. Those are some aspects that I loved about his speech. But he also put in his clone, Putin's clone, the AI Putin. The AI Putin on a screen asked Putin how his twins are doing. And yeah, that was just a joke for everybody because he's got so many body doubles according to Western sources.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That must have come in the last hour and a half because I only was able to catch the first 2.5 hours. I didn't see that. Ian, did you watch of it? What were any major takeaways? I think Ben hit on the biggest points.
I think those are the biggest points. There's a couple points that I had. So, like you said, I wouldn't call it random. I would say it's an open-ended press conference, which is as opposed to closed-ended, where they know the questions that this is just an open-end. This was apparently just an open-ended. People can ask any question out of left fields that they want, which you don't see from Biden. I mean, there have been multiple cases where, of course, he's not supposed to do this, but unfortunately, he's got so much dementia he forgets, but he'll actually pull. We've seen this on video multiple times. He'll pull out a list of the people he's supposed to call, which of course is not what you're supposed to do at a press conference. He'll actually in front of everybody pull out the card and read off names of reporters he's calling out, which you're not supposed to do. But I do bring up
Did you see the
600
the BBC guy? I forgot his name.
Yes.
Yeah, 4 hours, no questions, and he's holding that BBC printout.
He was upset, but yes.
I did not see that guy. So that's what his card said, 4 hours, no questions?
No, the card said BBC and his tweet said 4 hours, no questions. He didn't get his little propaganda in.
Yeah, I mean, why yeah.
But the big thing is, big takeaway for me was, he cited the specific number, 617,000 people
in the zone.
In the zone. And that puts them now, according to Zelensky, the Ukrainian armed forces have around 600,000 people. So that's just in terms of personnel. That's a 1-to-1 ratio. So I do think that answers the question that, they're not outnumbered like they were, like the Russian side was hurting very badly in terms of manpower. Last summer and fall, when there were those large Ukrainian offensives, and there was a manpower shortage. There were significantly larger numbers of Ukrainian troops, and they had the Western equipment. Now that's changed. Now it's a 1-to-1 ratio. Not even talking about equipment and vehicles. So Russia isn't losing, but at the same time, that doesn't sound like, unless they commit more, which is possible, but it doesn't look like we're going to see any significant Russian offensives either, besides what they're already doing, incremental gains across the front. I don't think we're going to see anything like any rushes on Kyiv like in the opening days, because you need 2 to 3 times more in terms of net firepower and manpower to make an offensive. So it doesn't sound like Russia even has that in mind, though that might change.
That's a great point.
Go ahead, Billy.
I was going to say, Putin was pretty emphatic that another mobilization at this point was not in the cards, that 600K was enough. They didn't feel like they needed to invest any more in expanding those numbers. So,
I think commit other forces outside the country. They could, which I don't think they'd mobilize more. They might commit more forces. I don't know if they're able to do that or want to do that. But in the absence of them committing more forces, I don't think you're going to see any large, dramatic Russian offensives, unless those numbers change.
I mean,
or you see a Ukrainian collapse, or there's an actual outright Ukrainian collapse along the front. Which
I think that's much closer to what's happening, to what's in the cards, a Ukrainian collapse, because I don't think he needs to push in. By the way, the latest TASS figures, also Scott Ritter and McGregor, say it's about 2 million. That is the full Russian armed forces. So they're using a small force in the SMO zone. But they have to prepare for a militarized Poland, a remilitarized Finland, who just let the US into like 15 of their bases. Like that's a couple hundred kilometers from St. Petersburg, Leningrad. They have to prepare for all these contingencies. But what has come out ever since in the West is so much panic. I mean, if the US, which seems to be lost for the moment, the US support is lost, then Ukraine is in for a loss, and we're all in for a very bad time. Paraphrasing like multiple articles. So they're really looking at this saying, we bet on the wrong horse and it's been left for us. I mean, some numbers, we had the EU talks, we'll talk about that a bit later. But the latest thing that Zelensky wanted, we talked about 1.3 million 155 shells, which don't exist in the world, 350 to 400 billion US dollars for a new offensive. The reconstruction from Voice of America is between 500 and 600 billion US dollars. I mean, that's a death trap to anybody who inherits it. And I think that's why America is slipping out and the peripheral of Europe is left in a huge panic. And I think that's close. That collapse is really, really close.
So let me interrupt everyone. So I've been neglecting our comments. So Spanish Fav says that Putin ate all the eggs. So of course the West is blaming Putin for that issue. Dust is asking about Carlo. So Carlo is actually coordinating our Tuesday interview with Vladimir Putin. So we hope to have that lined up.
Yes.
If it falls through, I apologize, but that's what's going on with that. Now, Carlo, we hope he's back. He had some doctor's appointments that take priority over our program. So we definitely understand. We want to
Good
say
luck.
hi to Shaniqua. Thanks for joining us, our biggest fan. And then Dust is making the point, addressing what you were saying, Ben, about, you know, the chaos and destruction was the goal from the beginning, because the U.S. isn't going to be hurt by it. It's the EU that's going to be hurt by it. It's the Ukrainian people themselves. And, you know, the U.S. doesn't really give a fuck.
Best investment we ever made, Lindsey Graham.
That's right. That's right. So Alinsky was pretty triumphant upon his return to Ukraine. He was trumpeting about, hey, you know,
he
Denmark
didn't go to Ukraine, though.
Isn't he back now? He's not back now?
Nope, he's in Germany at the moment, as far as I can tell.
He's still abroad, but he was saying he was trumpeting what he got from Denmark, what he got from what Iceland is going to give him. Iceland's going to give him a lot, right? Iceland's going to save Ukraine.
Yeah, the Nordic countries. Yes, check on Iceland on a map. It's rather big. It has less people than sheep in New Zealand. But yeah, that's the one that's going to save. I mean, look at Finland. That isn't a NATO country. The entire army is smaller than the Moscow police force. Okay, these are the guys that are going to save them. But since the big 61 billion from the US, 50 billion from the EU that Orban axed, thank God, has fallen through, they're giving the little 1 billion things. Norway has committed to 4 billion kroner for 5 years. Iceland, they're giving these little, okay, this will get you through the winter kind of shut up money, go home. But he's not going home. I mean, even after this road trip, he's just not going home. I don't blame him, by the way. Also, back to the comment. Yes, Putin ate all the eggs like Stalin ate all the grain in the 1930s Holodomor. Exactly. Yeah, seriously, the Nordic countries, they're going to pull Ukraine out from under Russia.
Well, that's all he has to brag about. It's these, you know, the little bits that are coming in, and he's you know, spotlighting that and saying, hey, look, don't worry, we're successful, we got all this. But it's what he's pointing to is very, very, very little in, you know, at least compared to, you know, what he's been getting in the US backing. So yeah, it's not definitely looking good. And maybe one of the reasons why he's not in Ukraine, because, you know, he's a little bit worried about his maybe his life, or at least his leadership over that country. I mean, that could be a possibility.
Yeah, wouldn't you?
There's no problem. Next month he's part of the European Union, and all the funds are going to flood towards Kiev. So
we can talk about that. That happened in Brussels, in your neck of the woods, in parallel. So if this happens, by the way, there was this big EU summit, 27 nations, and the one that said no, we mustn't, not admit Ukraine into EU, but something like accelerated accession talks. That was the thing. Accelerate Ukraine in, and Moldova, I think. For some reason, the one guy who said no, apparently Olaf Scholz took him out for a little coffee to the buffet. And while he was out for a coffee, Orban was, the rest voted to say yes. So, hey, we got that. Ukraine had this big victory that maybe soon will be in the EU. Then Orban got back and he axed the 50 billion euro aid to Ukraine. So that's gone. But what is this? If this happens tomorrow, reminder, Turkey got this status in 2005, so 18 years ago, still not in the EU. Even if they got into the EU, other than this token, hey, we have a PR victory, something on a camera, put the flags up. What would this entail for Ukraine, for Europe? What do you think? What are your thoughts, Wouter?
The bad thing about it is that if Russian troops are still on the ground, then you have a EU membership, a country with Russian soldiers, and that's kind of, I don't know how to, you know, tie that in a knot, because that's strange.
It's legally
impossible. I don't know what the legal requirements are in the. We all know, if you join NATO, that, you know, there should not be borders disputes, so that's, you know, legally off the table. Of course, you know, look at Ukraine. It was one of the most not only corrupt but fascistic countries in the world, and then our morals and values where they are. I mean, we know that they're all out of the window a long time, but this is crazy. And then we end up.
They fit in with Europe very well. The sort of Banderite fuckheads there.
Yeah, but I think there's a layer of society that's growing, the silent layer that says this is so hypocritical. And then if I can squeeze in, for example, Geert Wilders, this is a skillful politician who picks from the left and the right, and he picks up, obvious things. People want to have peace. People want to have an increase of minimum wage. By the way, quite similar to what happened in Russia. And the so-called left and the center is leaving all those topics totally, untouched. They don't even manipulate it anymore the way they used to do. So that's kind of good news. If they want to try to integrate Ukraine in Europe, there must be people with half a sane brain saying, hey, wait a minute, where are the political parties that are put out of the law in Ukraine? What about the networks that used to be, well, they were Russian, so that can be vilified, but where are the social democratical political parties in Ukraine? Where are they?
You know what's beautiful? That's the stick they constantly hit Hungary with, saying all the opposition media, meaning foreign-funded media, has been banned. And if you go online, 2 out of 3 articles are against Orban and pro-EU to this day. So there's a huge freedom of speech, but they say we don't have freedom of speech. We don't have freedom in political rights. And if you look at Ukraine, as you just described, that's the fabled Western democracy. Holy shit.
And another thing, I don't know, I want to check with you guys. I've heard about Ukraine law that enables a superior in the trenches, in the front line, to use force to, a soldier who is not complying, is not following orders. Is that true or not? Because those laws, it's execution on the spot. It's more than the death penalty. Those laws, how can you integrate that in the European Union? I mean,
I don't know if
Ian might be able to speak to that better. I'm sure in any combat situation, I mean, insubordination can be a capital offense, I would imagine.
Depending, right, in a war, especially, yes. I mean, it can be. I mean, it's that kind of worse. I wouldn't necessarily blame for the Ukrainians for that, though. You are seeing more videos, particularly on social media and Telegram, of those fights breaking out. There was a particularly famous one that went viral a couple months ago of some English-speaking soldiers who came out of their trench. They saw some Ukrainian soldiers who had said, peace out, I'm done. These English-speaking soldiers, I assume they were foreign mercenaries, stepped out to stop them. Maybe that was their job. Maybe they were told to stop people running away, or maybe they were just trying to be good Samaritans and
I was going to bring up that
shots. They got shots. Yes, the Ukrainians shot them, and I think that was kind of a dumb thing to do. You see some people who are just like leaving. Let them leave. They're not. Their leaving is not hurting you. It's not a good idea to start a confrontation with them, which they did, and they got shots.
But my point is that at the front line, the trenches, things happen out of the law. But this is a law. This is saying to superiors, if someone runs, take a run, shoot him in the back. If someone doesn't come out of the trenches and is ordered to do so, you can shoot him. That's the fascist stuff that we have been, fearing for. I would say, if you can, if someone stays in the trenches, you take that person, you bring him to a military court, and you let the law and the system handle that person. I would say that's regular lawfare law.
I would say it's strange. I mean, that's very true. I mean, it's not, because it's, from what I understand, the death penalties, is it frowned upon? Is it discouraged, or is it outright banned for European Union members to have a death penalty?
I know there is no.
No, there is none anymore. I think there used to be a long time lingering death penalties, but they never were executed. And then it's like for 40 years. This law is there, but
I'd say the question is why, like you said already, Wouter, why have a country that's a war zone that has foreign troops on their legally recognized territory into the European Union to begin with? It's kind of crazy that you have a European member state that you inherited that's at war. And it's like, okay, what do they do about it? I mean, they go to war too. They just kind of pretend there isn't an active war going on. And the irony, and I brought this up last broadcast we did, is that the irony of it is if Western leaders had said back in 2021 or even up to January 2022, okay, Ukraine is not going to join NATO, but they can join the European Union, and we're going to start that today, there would be no war now because that no one in Russia would care. As long as there was a promise to not join NATO, if they can join the European Union. The European Union is an economic union. No one in Russia is upset about that. No one cares.
It was an economic union. It is transforming in front of our eyes. A lot of people are talking, from Schröder, ex-leaders, talking about you have to have an armed forces for ourselves. They're not talking about NATO. They're talking about EU armed forces. So yeah, in 2022,
the European Union, I mean, they've been talking about that for years. Wouter, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't see that happening.
You're right. Every few years, someone brings it up and nothing happens. You're absolutely right.
I see people talk about that. I see European people talk about that on Facebook. Going back years, we need a European army. And this was back when it was popular to pretend they were sovereign from the USA. We need a European army. So we're not just,
Previous French, the Hungarian, Sarkozy had that program for a week and then it was forgotten. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I don't see it happening.
Back to your point and the conversation, Wouter, again, I don't know the legal stuff. I can't cite anything like that, but I saw the video that Ian addressed, and there's a bunch of videos where these forcefully recruited people get away and talk to the Russians, saying they were these groups behind us, these enforcement groups. It's circumstantial evidence at best, but at the trials, I think this could be a serious thing. And I think those trials are coming, whatever the Europeans think about Ukraine's future. I mean, some of the West says if you can hold out in 2024, then maybe you can have another offensive in 2025. That's their thinking now, which I think is out of this. It's on Mars. But there's a lot of evidence for that behavior.
I bring it up because I've heard a story out of reliable source of a woman, young mother, years ago coming to Belgium, became a cleaning lady over here, left her young son with a family. He grew up. And lately he turned 18. He was taken into the military. He deserted and he was shot. So this is not a rumor. I would like to know whether this happens on the Russian side also. I would be surprised, but I don't know. I mean, I think the Russian military is quite well structured and well disciplined not to have these kind of things. I don't know.
Not even in Wagner. I can't speak for, again, legal certainties. But, the propaganda in World War II was the same. Like they had the machine guns before the Russians and they were convicts with just a knife or something. It was German propaganda then. It's German propaganda now. It's whatever they accuse Russia of, they are doing themselves. It's the exact same as Israel-Gaza story, which, that's later. But when people see, as I mentioned, the Leopard tank, the fucking German tanks with the Balkenkreuz, the Iron Cross on the side. They say, I'm going to make my granddad proud. I'm going to take this fucker out. Are you with me? All the videos from Russian groups on the front are, enjoying some music. I recently saw one where they played, I don't know what that sport is, where you push something on the ice, curling, but with mines without the detonator. They're having fun and they are highly, highly motivated to make their granddads proud. That is the Russian morale that I can see from Telegram.
So the problem with Ukraine is that I would say they're very similar to the Russians. I mean, they basically, you're not supposed to say that, but they basically are.
Putin said it.
I mean,
Putin said it. We are three prongs of one people: Belarus, Ukraine, and us, and we're on this sad civil war. He said that.
But the problem is that when you have these two near identical groups fighting, what's going to determine who wins is who has superior numbers and who has the most arms. And right now, Russia has the most arms because the West is following through on all their big talk about arming Ukraine to the teeth. So I do think this will go another year, at least. I've said that before, because I think what we're seeing now with that 50 billion being voted down repeatedly, I mean, we saw that with the NATO ascension. Sweden is still bickering with Turkey about it, but I think they'll eventually get into NATO. Finland's already in NATO. I think it's going to be the same thing with that 50 billion. Orban's they're going to make a deal that he gets what he wants for Hungary, and he says yes, they get that $50 billion. I think the same with Republicans in the USA. Ukraine will eventually get that $60 billion. That'll be over $100 billion. Now what's important is fresh military equipment and munitions. They might get a lot less of that.
And recruits.
But
They can always throw the cash at the Russians and hope they cause some paper cuts.
Yeah, I mean, do you guys follow Alexei Arestovich, the birdman in Kiev, the former advisor to Zelensky?
I've seen a few things from him, yes.
Immediately as this Q&A was going, he had one long telegram, which was later turned into a tweet, said, look, he's talking in front of a yellow-blue background, like the Ukrainian background, and he's talking about us as brothers. If Zelensky taught in front of a white, red, blue background, he'd be torn apart. So who's losing here? And his second thing was he mentioned that in Ukraine, there's 5 million military-aged people absolutely hiding from recruitment. What does that tell you about the morale? He said there are mothers going out to carry the heavy bags, and they're sometimes husbands, sometimes young, like youth, the 20-year-old children are hiding under their skirts, not to get enlisted by the military. You know, I think there was a recent, not Levada, that's Russian, a Kiev poll, like the number of people who would exchange territory for peace has doubled just in the last couple of months. I mean, there seems to be no will.
So given all that, Ian, it's interesting that you would predict we got another year, and that the U.S. and the EU are gonna eventually, throw another $50 billion down the drain, respectively, in pursuit of this futile effort. I mean, we're gonna hold you to that, Ian. We're gonna have you back in.
I'm in the collapse
I will
camp.
be very surprised if they don't push through. And the thing is, there might not be enough for an offensive, but you don't need a lot to maintain what their defense and what they're doing, like in Kherson region, what they're doing right now, tossing these Marines. It's pretty brutal to toss these small. I mean, I can't even imagine that strategy, just sending these small boats of people across the river over and over. When they die, they send more. You can do that a while until you just start scraping the bottom of the barrel of your manpower pool. But you can do that. It doesn't take a lot to support that. And that's hard to fight, too. It does take a lot of effort to fight that. It's difficult. So even if they don't get enough tanks and artillery shells to do a big counteroffensive next year, they can be a pain in the ass for another 12 months at least if they want to. And I would not bet Zelensky would last another year. I think I would not take that bet. I think there's a very good chance you're going to have a repeat of the 1964 coup in South Vietnam, where we asked one guy for a different guy. There was the military junta took over. I think that's possible, and there's thoughts of that in Washington. Zelensky
Maybe they can even assassinate Zelensky and blame Putin for it.
He could get that one of those or he could get poisoned and say he has to recuperate in Miami.
Yeah.
Well, he's surrounded by NATO right now. He's in the Wiesbaden, the German, that's the center of US aid for Ukraine. And there was this short video of him and the new, I think, 3-star general they sent there to micromanage the conflict in Ukraine and do some more board games of what we can actually do, these little tabletop games. So if they wanted to take him out, I think they could, but it looks like the US is trying to. I don't know. There's a difference of opinion within the US, within the higher circle, that's sure. Some people say, look, Ukraine has already won, it's still standing. And the other people say it's not about a stalemate, it's about absolute military defeat. So it's difficult to find a path, but I'm much closer to the sudden collapse school of thought than Ian is. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I just don't see Ukrainian chatter about enough. I don't see enough Ukrainian chatter about giving up. I see a lot of Ukrainian chatter about getting rid of Zelensky because they're unhappy with him. I can't say I blame them. They might just say, okay, we get another strong leader who knows what he's doing. He's going to win the war for us now. And I think also the problem with these far-right fascist regimes, there's a pattern of them not collapsing. What happens, like with the classic case being Germany in World War II, they did not collapse. They didn't, let's be honest, they did not collapse. They just shrank and shrank and shrank until it was just Berlin. And then they did not. There was no big. If people were waiting for Germany to collapse, they were disappointed because it didn't. Even Japan didn't collapse either. I mean, they literally had nothing left at the end. I mean, they were. I mean, with Japan it was a little different because they were looking for an exit ramp for those last few months. They wanted a conditional surrender those last few months, but in the end, they had no empire, they had no mainlands, they had nothing. They were just those islands that were nuked, and it's just. I think that's what's happening with Ukraine. It's just there's going to be nothing left when they do fold.
Fair point, but here's a counterpoint. You've probably all seen the nightclubs in Kiev. They're having a splendid time. It's not like it's flattened like Gaza is. There's still electricity. There's phone. There's people having an absolute splash. And on the front line, you've probably seen videos of like people who look like my granddad did, like above 60, well above 60, and young, seriously 17-year-old kids being there, which I'm just saying, Ukraine hasn't reported their losses, their actual numbers. They report something from the sky. There was this, well, they called it a hacking attempt on the television when the television little, that running thing said 1.1 million missing and dead. And then it was quickly retracted. I just don't know. Even if all the weapons come in, even if all that comes in, I don't know if the military strength in people is actually still there.
The number of people and the quality of training, that's
that's what they complain about. The people who are captured or just go over to the Russian side, saying we got like 2 weeks in some Scottish camp by some German NATO general, and then they sent us to the front, and we didn't know the first thing what to do.
And Putin even referenced the women, the women fighting in the front now, the women being mobilized in the Ukrainian army, getting sent to the front. So definitely some issues there. We're all in agreement that if it's unlikely, obviously, that Ukraine would join the EU, but if they did, we're all in agreement that wouldn't be very good for the EU. Like, what would the EU do? What does Ukraine have to offer the EU? They would be a tremendous drag on the economy, a tremendous burden. So what on earth would that do? So that's why we all agree that it's very unlikely that's going to happen. They're going to string it out for for an infinite number of decades, like they've done to Turkey, right?
Well, if the country's still around, maybe. I mean, I've cited it before. The Voice of America, like the big CIA magazine, said the reconstruction bill for Ukraine is between $500 and $600 billion. That's what you inherit with Ukraine. You inherit a massive bill. I mean, when the USA got cut off, they're not paying pensions, they're not paying doctors, firefighters, the basic services, people. This is not a functioning country.
Yes, and if those wages are cut, that's an immediate, it's immediate breakup. It's a shock. It's not like, we have to spend the next 10 years building up and buying material and also all that stuff. It's people not being able to, afford the regular stuff to get to the next day.
Yeah.
And that makes me think, what do we really know about the opinion, the stance of the Ukrainian people? Because,
not much.
The left is being silenced, or they went to Russia, or they went to Western Europe, or they went to hiding and just mind their own business. So, and at the other hand, you get a brain drain. Apart from political, opinion you might have, the people we see here arrive in Belgium, who are there? They're the young, the smart, the strong, the well-educated, the ones with network, and they are very welcomed over here. This is a perfect example how you take immigrants or refugees in. They're talking Dutch in half a year. They have jobs. They go to parties. They're welcomed and they integrate very well because they have a diploma and no health issues and so on.
What you're saying is they're not going back.
They're not going back. The first months I've heard someone say the first months we were thinking, should we learn Dutch? I mean, of course. If in a half a year you return, you don't put in the effort. But from a couple of months they were here, they started to take the reached out hand and do the education.
And they're
over
actually
here.
offering something to Dutch society, right? Like, because they are educated, they can be productive members of society. They're not drawing off of the welfare system, et cetera, et cetera.
It's the typical brain drain that the United States
Yeah,
did.
the U.S. is really good at that.
Yeah, not
It's
the
not
same.
like we just take anybody. Yeah.
Not the same in Germany. There's a lot of complaints that, hey, you're just sitting on welfare, which we need to curb because, like, I don't know, 60 or 70% of them just don't work. And they were taught, the Pistorius, the defense minister, talked about sending them back to the front line, which is a very humane European thing to do.
Okay,
But even
that's new.
he did, but Scholz has actually just curbed the budget and making, hey, come on, please be part of productive society, as opposed to Belgium, I guess. Germany has issues with the.
Now, here's a question. Now, which Wouter or Ben might be able to answer because I read this somewhere about a week ago. I've heard that in European courts, that's specifically spelled out that military obligations are explicitly not a justified reason to deport a refugee.
Yes, absolutely. It was an illegal thing, well, not to suggest, but an illegal thing to put into practice. Absolutely.
I'm sorry,
So
I didn't catch.
I think that's
Well,
part of the Geneva thing. Like, if you want to deport people, you can't deport them into an active military zone. I think.
Oh yeah,
that was
yeah. That's the law. That's a rule.
completely
Yes.
illegal. Yeah.
Yeah, you can deport someone if he committed a crime or if there's some civil infraction he committed, but a government cannot tell the European Union, hey, deport our guy because we want to conscript him. That's explicitly, from what I understand, this explicitly.
No, that's interesting.
Not allowed.
I didn't know that. So they're in a little bit of a conundrum, with their own laws, but I'm sure they will find a way around that if it's deemed necessary that, Ukraine needs more cannon fodder. We talked about the EU army, and we said that's not really a realistic thing. It gets talked about every now and then. But what about if Trump somehow becomes the next president? I think in that situation, that this talk about an EU army might actually, because Trump is against the what is that? The freaking there's a word, the Atlantic
NATO.
Well, okay, yeah,
North
NATO.
Atlantic,
I mean,
trade
that wasn't what I was
organization.
trying to remember. But yeah,
Atlanticism.
NATO. He's against NATO. Lip service to being against NATO. And in that case, I think there would be a more likelihood that an EU military might take shape. What do you guys think about that? And that can lead us into the anti-Trump hysteria. We've got a fun clip about some anti-Trump hysteria, but it's pretty long. It's a pretty long clip.
But it is fun. It is fun. It's the US mainstream media being absolute lunatics. Did you guys watch? I think it was yesterday. I saw it on the Hill that the US, what is it, Senate, Congress? I have to research how the fucking US actually works. Congress approved a bill barring any president from unilaterally withdrawing from NATO. So you need congressional or Senate approval to do that. That is clearly like a preventive law against if a Trump presidency should happen.
Well, I would say just that. So the thing with the USA, so we have this, we have two houses in our legislative branch. You have the executive branch, which is headed by the president, the chief executive. It's one of those you've kind of, it's like boiling a frog. Over time, the president has gradually gotten more unilateral power, Trump or Biden has far more unilateral power than say Eisenhower or Roosevelt did. There's definitely, so I would say it's leaving NATO is a very serious, I mean, maybe in theory he could write an executive order saying, hey, we're leaving NATO, but that is, such a major decision that needs to be voted on before it happens. So that's, even if it wasn't on paper, it is actually a good thing that's on paper. Because I mean, that is a huge decision.
Yeah, and here's a clip just showing the hysteria of their concern that Trump would even, if he would be elected, he would even start talking about things like that. That so terrifies them that they came up with
it's actually comical, but a really good montage. Enjoy.
What would a second Donald Trump term look like? Well, he cannot be the next president. Because if he is,
you can't imagine the things that he's going to do. Mexico, Canada. We can't go to Canada because eventually Canada will become annexed to America.
And shoot visitors to the White House. Yeah, that means he can shoot the First Lady.
We're going to see violence, the likes of which we didn't even see on January 6th.
Make it illegal to run against him, to throw his opponents in jail, to shut down the media.
He will make himself into the Fuhrer, and he will make everybody raise their hand and salute him.
Using martial law against the American people.
Terminate the Constitution.
To rewrite the Constitution.
Create mass internment camps.
Throw everyone into Gitmo.
Might be sent to jail, or their rights might be suppressed, especially minority groups in society.
You might have any number of things happen to you and your family.
Every one of us, our freedom, our liberty, none of us is safe.
It's going to have people around him executing against an enemy's list.
I think Al Sharpton's in this.
Generals
ordering troops to attack American citizens.
Trump's very well-armed and extremist base will try to kill people.
He's going to basically burn the house down.
He will unravel the institutions of our democracy.
Draw similarities between Mussolini and Hitler.
Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini.
Makes Donald Trump even more dangerous.
Wants to take away your vote.
Senate and the House are immediately going to be paralyzed.
People will begin in their minds to censor themselves. They might say, well, maybe I shouldn't say this.
It's the end of democracy.
I think that could be the end of our democracy.
Democracy is dead if Trump is reelected.
Cozy up to Putin that democracy will be at risk.
The absolute destruction of the Justice Department as we know it.
The Justice Department could be entirely transformed.
I am really concerned about that.
Every person who was associated with the attempted coup elevated in the administration.
If he's reelected, he will curb transgender rights.
And the rule of law.
Arrest political opponents to persecute, not prosecute, but persecute his enemies.
Take a wrecking ball to the rule of law.
He's going to make the law. Everyone else will have to follow.
Vote for Donald Trump may mean the last election that you ever get to vote in.
To go after the independent and free parts of American civic life.
He would tear down our institutions, purge the government of employees.
Department by department effort to weaponize the powers of the government.
To use the military to quash protests.
Ridding the government of all democratic safeguards.
Junking American democracy as we have always known it.
That he would try to stay in office beyond a second term. That he would never leave office.
There's no question.
Trump is reelected, he won't leave.
Donald Trump will never leave office voluntarily.
And what that means is that everybody who wants us to remain
Rachel.
a republic has to put every other thing aside and work together urgently right now to stop that from happening.
Can you guys imagine a society where the political opponents of the ruling establishment are persecuted? Like, what would that even look like? Okay, that's sarcasm because that kind of looks like what we have now.
I'm really enjoying this because these are all types of the mainstream and sort of the DC types of people, all in an absolute panic. It's Benito Mussolini, it's Hitler. He's going to kill people on the White House lawn, take away all the rights. The fabled rule of democracy is they've gone insane. Jimmy Dore was right years ago with the Trump derangement syndrome. But.
Well, I would say, and I lost my train of thought for a second, but in my lifetime, this kind of rhetoric is unprecedented, right? And for that reason, I kind of think that, that's what leads me to believe that Trump is actually, not, because, there's this discussion among people. Is Trump, just like all the rest, is he controlled opposition? Or are they really, concerned and scared about him coming to power? So to me, it just seems obvious how they dealt with him in his first term and how they've dealt with him in his reelection, and then now that they literally don't want him because he's dangerous to their interests, and not necessarily because he's principled or because he's a good guy, but because he's got ideas that are different from their ideas, and for that reason, he is a legitimate threat. And the proof of that, I think, is this over-the-top rhetoric, which I have never seen in my lifetime. But I know it's a contentious issue. I know people disagree with me on that. But if you watch that, like, they don't talk like that about anybody else. They didn't talk like that about Bernie Sanders,
It's like Putin. They talk about Putin and Trump the same way, literally.
But you're right. They're seriously rattled. I think that's the impression here. They haven't been this rattled in a long time.
I would say it's when I see hysteria like this in the news, that means they're conditioning their audiences for something. So like you remember that, I forget who is that woman who had that viral image of holding Trump's decapitated heads on that magazine cover.
The
I
comedian
forget,
lady.
Kathy Griffin.
Yeah.
That's conditioning people for, in that case, when you have calls for violence like that, that's conditioning the public for violence. So I think when you have people openly talking about civil war, about unrest, about draconian measures, it's conditioning people to accept that as a plausible thing that could happen. Because, when you're sitting in your house in your nice first world developed country, it's hard to believe that there could be civil war on your streets. But when they say it over and over, it conditions you to accept that as a plausible thing that could happen. So you could see extreme measures. The next election will be very interesting. And even the last election, as more and more information comes out about it, it was the most mailed. We had the most mailed-in votes in history. 47% of all votes in the American election are mail-in, which is amazing. And there have been studies saying that 20% of those mail-in votes, not even counting, were forged. Yes. So, that's not more than enough to swing the election. So if they
here on YouTube, we would never ever question the legitimacy of America's great democracy, best democracy ever. And, we cannot impugn the integrity of our electoral system. Having said that, never mind.
If I were Trump, I might quit at this point because I'd feel, really like my life felt threatened after all this absolute hysteria. But talking about Ian's point on conditioning, I won't play it because we'll get even copyright stricken, but there's a new trailer for a new movie out called Civil War. Have you seen that? It's about the main characters, protagonists are journalists, and they're in the middle of a war with at least Texas and Florida breaking away from the eastern United
California.
States.
Yes.
Sorry, California and Texas, and it's like on the White House lawn, they shoot journalists on sight. I mean, that was part of the trailer. It's like if I've ever seen conditioning, that was like, what the fuck am I watching?
It's so typical of these liberal filmmakers to portray the because the average person in America just does not like journalists, thinks they're sleazeballs. But in movies, oh my gosh, journalists are like they're like these Christ-like saints, just the most heroic people in the world. Like they're literally braver than our soldiers,
holding power to account.
Yes.
Yeah, but these people, especially the filmmakers, they sit in their nice house in Martha's Vineyard and Vermont and places like that, completely isolated from real America. So they're in this.
It's the same director as 28 Days Later. So I guess he's British. It's so funny to see like British people make movies about Americans because you see all these weird stereotypes they have about us. It's like because California and Texas would never be in a civil war together. They don't agree on anything. Literally nothing. So it's funny to see a British person who's like, oh, what are two big American states? Those might be the only American states he might be able to name, possibly. He's like, well, we see there's Florida, there's Texas, and there's California. So those three states, they do a civil war thing. I did no research whatsoever on American politics.
I'll tell you what, I'm far away from America and glad for it, but I'm going to watch this movie.
Definitely some conditioning. It's topical, right? Because it's the thought in a lot of people's minds, but it's being put there on purpose, right? That thought is being introduced to people's minds in a top-down way. It's
But
what was interesting? I'm sorry, not to cut you off, but I was going to say, there was a civil war. There was another Civil War movie in the works. When was Hurricane Katrina? What year was that? Oh my gosh, I forgot. 2008. 2000. No, it was earlier than that. 2006, something.
I wanted to say 2006, but I'm not certain.
Yeah, so a couple of years after that, there was actually a right-wing independent filmmaker who was making a Civil War themed movie, and then there was this weird murder-suicide with him and his family. It was very tragic, and there were accusations that it was a CIA op or something. 2005, Shanika. Thank you, Shanika. Yes. And And it's very similar to this Civil War movie, except it was a right-wing guy who was making it, but he had that murder-suicide with his family. It was very weird and tragic, but you could watch the trailer for that. But yeah, so that that's definitely conditioning. I think, Ben, you're right. That's
I'm glad it wasn't in the cheat sheet, but I'm glad everybody pretty much knew about this trailer and had the same kind of thoughts that I did. Yeah, very just watch it. It's a very weird trailer, especially for these times.
Do you think
journalists are the heroes?
Wouter, you were going to say something?
Do you think those movies are well made so that they really have an impact? Because when I was young, I watched quite a lot of movies. Nowadays, I don't anymore because the quality is so low. Like video games don't mean that people are gonna go out and shoot stuff. That straight line doesn't really work unless you get a really good propaganda culture program. The politicians right now, they're not the smartest ones.
No.
Then we don't have we don't have Kissingers anymore. I would say.
God.
And thank God, because
look, he was competent. He was an absolute bastard, but at least he was competent. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very bad combination. We're
incompetent and ruthless. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, both in culture as in politics, I don't see, very skillful people. They can cause damage, they can cause chaos, but not in a very deep, destructive way that, the world cannot, come over. The Sahel region is not infiltrated, whether it's boots on the ground or color revolution wise. It's still standing. It's still early days to really be, not afraid anymore. But they don't get a grab. They're panicking. They're hysterical. They're going to say, Ukraine, join the EU. I mean, that's cheap to say. That's all they can say. To me, it's all cheap stuff. It's not harmless, but it's cheap, and maybe that's a positive thing. I don't know. Just a random thought.
You're right. If you look at the constant propaganda stream coming out of Israel in the slaughter of Gaza, it's very bad. I mean, even Ukraine's propaganda this last year has been better quality, and we've been laughing at that for a long time. The very, very bad quality. I mean, I'm going to be the resident Carlo to say that, Americans are ninnies, something he loves to say. So this is me channeling him. The 1990s, when we in Eastern Europe got to see American movies, it was supposed to impress us. Beautiful neon lights, Las Vegas, the big aircraft carrier, the American hero F-16 jets, all of that beautiful. And it did the job. America's the best place in the world. Coca-Cola, blue jeans, honey. But this latest, I think, bad quality stuff, the difference is this is aimed at America. This isn't aimed at us. This isn't aimed at the overseas. This is aimed at America, who are looking at, gas prices and food prices and thinking, what the fuck is next? And in that regard, I still see it as, well, not a danger, but a preparatory step. You mentioned games, and I completely agree that violent video games don't make you into a mass shooter, but there is a documented pipeline from first-person shooters which have esports teams by the US fucking army to the military. So there is that kind of pipeline. You shoot Venezuelans on screen, and it's going to be just that easy. I mean, Batman Arkham Knight, I think the game. One of the main bad guys had Venezuelan mercenaries. That's when I thought, what? Something's going on here with games.
Yeah,
and then because of China's intense integration with the global economy and how Western capitalists depend on the Chinese market, they often are not the target. Certain factions would like them to be the bad guys in movies, and they end up changing them for like North Koreans and stuff like that because China still has the political clout, and they don't want to piss off the Chinese market. Anyway,
wait. Second Carlo point: the Americans are ninnies. They can't tell people apart who have that kind of Asian eye. You picked up that thing about someone vandalized a Vietnamese nail salon, saying "fuck the Chinese, go home." Like that's completely. What did you achieve?
God bless those ninnies, those American ninnies. They can't get their hate right.
By the way, I know. Go ahead, Ian.
Yes. So the points about Israel's propaganda being laughable, but it's directed internally. I'd say that's absolutely true. I saw some news articles over the past few days saying that it's laughable to us, but internally it's very effective on Israeli audiences. So I think your point of comparing American propaganda with Israel's propaganda is completely on the nose because it's directed internally. It sucks to outsiders looking in. It's like, this is ridiculous, but it's tuned in to what those people are feeling, and it works. So Israel's propaganda is absurd as it looks to us on the outside looking in. It apparently is having an effect on Israeli citizens in Israel. So
yeah, they're pretty supportive. They want more. Like 60% of them want more. More bombs, more bloodshed in Gaza. It's disgusting.
To link to something we've been talking earlier about, an EU army, I don't see it happening. I mean, a strong EU army, because we don't have this, war propaganda. All over Europe, you can hear people say the EU is great because we never had a war since the EU was a thing. So people are really in love with.
Yugoslavia, hello. Well, is that really true, though?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's my answer too. But then they say, yeah, but that's they just sweep it under the carpet. But the fact that people are constantly saying that, it's like, peace, peace, peace. There is, I mean, that's remarkable. It's not like, I got a son and he needs to be in the army and toughen up and become a man and all that stuff. I mean, I'm ridiculizing, okay, but we don't have that. We've grown soft, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I mean, if you got to defend, you got to defend.
That's a big hurdle for the ruling class to overcome if they decide they need to pursue that kind of a strategy where they remilitarize the EU. It's going to be difficult because that's a huge hurdle for them to overcome, and hopefully they can't. And like we're saying, they're incompetent, right? And so they have all these ideas and grand strategies that fail continuously, one after the other. And right now they find themselves in this predicament where there's no, it's hopeless for them. Like there's no way that they can maintain the Western hegemonic empire that they've enjoyed since 1945, really. And it's falling apart, and they're hysterical. But it's great because they're literally, there's nothing they can do about it, and they're too incompetent in any event. Go ahead.
I agree with Wouter's point on this being so soft and non-militaristic being a fair point, but like a positive thing, but in a different way. I think we are entering an era where the US has to recede. It has to go back and leave Europe alone. And then Europe, faced with this crisis, completely demilitarized. Germany and England both pretty much admitted to that. We got nothing even to defend ourselves. They will finally have to talk, to their neighbors, to Russia, to China, to actually get into a dialogue. And not do this jingoistic America will come and save us, because they've been doing that for 30 years. That could be good news for the region. Yeah,
that's what I mean. I mean, then negotiations, if we're at that point, they're going to be very quick and easy, because I don't believe Russians are hating us.
No.
They're just very disappointed and not counting on us anymore, and just leave us alone. Ukraine should be neutral, but in fact, the whole of Europe should be neutral. Not to bother us. That's I mean, you just agree to disagree on some things, and you go your own way, and you build a new Iron Curtain. I don't care.
No. Going full circle, just a quick thought back to the Vladimir Putin 4-hour speech. There was one question about people in Europe. Some people in Germany, I think, was the question. They completely agree with everything you've done. What do you think about that? He said it's not just Germany. There's a lot of Western countries where people think standing up and saving our sovereignty is a good thing. We know they exist. I'm going to paraphrase because it's not from him, but I think Sergei Lavrov last week said that there are no unfriendly countries for Russia in this world. There are unfriendly regimes or governments. But we don't consider entire countries, as unfriendly. That's a bit of hope.
And I would make the point. I mean, how prosperous would Europe be? How prosperous could Russia be if the pipeline was continuing? Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2. There was good relations. More trade. if the U.S. wasn't, absolutely devoted to destroying Russia, destroying China as rivals to their hegemony. Like if the U.S. wasn't there pursuing that, like how great of a place could the world be? And the fact that it's not more prosperous, more getting along better because of win-win trade. And the U.S. is to blame for that. And the U.S. is happy to, plunge Europe into poverty, murder, 500,000, half a million Ukrainians, in this futile pursuit of maintaining their hegemony. It's really disgusting.
Yeah. Thus, James, in his comment, was right. Chaos was the goal, is the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it'll be great when the West no longer has the power to wreak so much havoc around the world, and when we have countries like China and Russia, setting up the system, which is basically peace through mutual prosperity, win-win trade and development, especially of the third, the developing world. But
do you know how bad it's got? Not just I always want to say Nehammer, but he's the Austrian. Whoever is the German president, not the chancellor. Right, that guy was held up, for half an hour in maybe the Qatari airport. Like he was like this in his little airplane, and nobody came to fucking greet him. Then they sent the EU delegation to China. Ursula, Charles Michel, and the third guy, whoever they were all there, and they were saying, "Look, you're playing along with Russia, and if you do this, we're going to sanction your countries." And even in the diplomatic response, China didn't even fucking address it. They just didn't take it seriously. Do whatever. You think you're a player in this? You think you have relevance in the world? We're sorry, that era is over. That's the message from China.
And the good news about European elections is we have a lot of turnover. We've got a lot of people who change seats. Different from Russia, you get consistency. We call it undemocratic, but it's stronger. So, and that's something I'm hopeful for too. If you see other politicians, stepping in lightly, one at a time, that can, pivot, that can tip the scales, balance things out in a different way, and that can happen reasonably quickly. If there is no perspective in a victory, then you get people like Geert Wilders, who is partly extreme right and is a little bit on the left,
and has the hair.
Yeah, and he's pro-peace. I mean, the whole left, except a couple of radical on the left parties, they were pro-war. I mean, the peace movement should be something of the left, and they just, they sold out big time. And then an opportunistic, skillful politician like Wilders, he says, hey, there's 20-30% of the people who really want to stop funding the war. I mean, I'm going to say this. And I want to close the mosques because another,
immigration
of the people. And immigration, close the borders. And what do the people want? Oh, yeah, higher minimum wages. Okay, I'll promise that. He just, collects a bunch of things in his basket, and he's got a quarter of the votes, which in such a multi-party party system is quite significant. And that works. So it's kind of volatile. What can be expected for the next 1 or 2 or 3 years, I think.
It can't happen fast enough, but I wish I shared all of your optimism, because there was this chick, the Benito Mussolini's granddaughter or something, Miss Meloni, who got elected on the same promise. We're not going to send anything to Ukraine. And immediately she flipped around, and one of the big Ukraine supporters in like a couple of months. And Geert Wilders, as you said, he's been voted upon, but he's not yet leading the country. No. So it might be very different from the election program. And that's a big issue in Europe. Yeah, you either part of the mold, or as Ursula said, we have tools. If you elect the wrong person or you do the wrong thing, we have tools.
Yeah. I agree. We're not out of the woods. If you look at what Greece tried to do, they went against the stream and they were attacked. But the Netherlands is not Greece. The Netherlands is a guiding country in the European Union. if there's things even partly shifting in the people's consciousness, that might be that might cause a shift. And yeah, I don't know.
I admire that. I'm much more cynical, but I really admire your optimism.
Yeah.
In this regard.
It's strange times, we've not seen this in our lifetime, so it's kind of guessing work all the time, but yeah.
One thing we didn't touch on was that recent video, which we can't show on YouTube, about some dysfunction, in Ukrainian society. I guess there was like a town council meeting going on at kind of a lower level. It wasn't like a central government thing, but like a local regional town council or something. And apparently, Ben, you said this guy was a veteran of the war, and he was having. Go ahead.
A lower level commissioner or something within the Servant of the People, Zelensky's party. So that guy. And we can't show, I don't even want to watch the video again, but he walked into this meeting and pretty much just unclicked 2 grenades and dropped them. And I think killed himself and wounded something like between 10 and 20 people. I don't recall the number. Horrific video, but it tells you something about the mental stress of Ukraine. I mean, all the news was, we're winning, everything's fine, we are glorious. And they're beginning to question that. Financial Times ran an article saying, we don't believe the rose-tinted speeches of Zelensky. And now they get the news that the US is pulling their multi-billion funding. And I think we're in for a lot more of that. And by the way, personally for Hungary, this is in the Zakarpattia region, which borders on Hungary. Transcarpathia, we call it Carpathia, which is where the Hungarian minority lives. That's exactly where this scene happened. And
he was a veteran that was having difficulty getting his
adjusting
right?
back home. He ran out of social services credit, and he was looking for like mental services.
And he was just standing against the door for quite some time while they were arguing back and forth. And then it was very casual, and they seemed like stun grenades. They didn't seem like fragmentary grenades, but yeah.
Yeah, it's today's news. The details are still sort of flowing in, but it's a horrible scene. And by the way, before that, when you said they were arguing, we're not talking about a casual conversation like we're having here. People are yelling across the room. I mean, it's not a calm society. That's what I'd say.
Spiraling into chaos and dysfunction.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, that's an hour and 17 in. Does anybody have any burning thing they want to?
I especially, since we have Ian with us, I wanted to get your thoughts, because when Zelensky was in Washington, not the same fanfare as last year with the flags and the open Congress, but he talked to people and tried to lobby Congress. News came out first, like from this U.S. intelligence report that got given to Congress and leaked by CNN and the Washington Post and New York Times about Russia basically fighting with 13%, because 87% of their force has been destroyed. They've been set back 18 years. Have you seen this? What is your take on this?
So the exact quote is that the initial forces that entered Ukraine on 22nd and 24th of February 2022, out of those, 87% have been killed or injured. Now, that's unlikely. It's also very specific. I don't think when people trot out such specific numbers, like even the Russian numbers are not specific, like even if you read their claims of battle damage assessments of the enemy, they'll say, we destroyed up to 100 militants in this region. We destroyed up to 15. They're not. So the British in particular love these extremely specific. And it's just like, how do you know that? You don't. It's BS. And they're trotting that out. They're trotting that out.
Timing.
I assume because it's meant to be a counterbalance to the hysteria about Ukraine losing. They want to say, well, look, Ukraine is in very dire straits if we don't give them more money, but Russia is hurting too. But look what they've exactly. So it's a calculated and the timing is not coincidental.
It's grabbing at straws. Yeah, Olaf Scholz did the same. Look, they got the fleet out of the Black Sea. They recaptured half the territory that Russia has taken. It's look what they've done. I mean, if we stop supporting them now, yeah.
And sunk cost fallacy is very psychologically effective. You walk into a casino, you lose $3,000 or 3,000 euros. You're like, but look, if I walk away now, I've lost those $3,000. If I keep spinning the wheel, I can win. I can earn it back. So I think sunk cost fallacy is going to play a big role in the next few weeks.
Yeah, in the casino, you still have statistics. You get chance on your side. If you lost 4 times, statistically, the 5th time you get a very big chance to win something back again. This is totally different if you are fighting a prepared enemy that has a different type of economy, that plays along different rules, with different motivation, different history, all this stuff. And it even makes it worse than the regular sunk cost fallacy in a casino. It's like, you bought yourself into an investment. It's a money drain. It's a money pit. You keep, throwing it at it, but it's definitely a good comparison.
They would have a much better chance if they were in a casino, but this is the real world, and I think they know. I think they're done. I think they're done dumping money down the drain. That's my prediction.
I'll close with the thought. So, I've said this many times that it'll go for another 12 months, and it could be wrong, but the biggest motivation to do that is because it's not us. And the NATO enthusiasts, the Ukraine enthusiasts themselves will say it. Look, we've destroyed, 900% of the Russian armed forces and lost 0 troops ourselves. That is, at least the second part is true. So from their perspective, they lose nothing. If another 100,000 Ukrainians are killed in this horrible, pointless war, it's no loss to NATO. So there's from their perspective, there's no reason. Even if, in fact, I want to cite, he's a professor at Jerusalem University. He's a very well-known writer in military circles in the USA, Martin Van Creveld. He said this several months ago. He said on his blog that if Ukraine loses the conventional war, they should switch to guerrilla warfare. And he estimates only 50 Ukrainians will die for every 1 Russian. So in his mind,
how many?
50 if they switch to guerrilla warfare. Because, of course, in a guerrilla warfare, the casualties are much worse for the insurgents typically. So in his mind, it's like, only 50 Ukrainians will die for every 1 Russian. So in his mind, that's worth it. And that's, I think, he's speaking for people in the Pentagon, in Brussels, all these Western countries that, even if 50 or 100 Ukrainians die for every 1 Russian, it's worth it.
Well, okay. I mean, my thought that just came into my head is like, that's 50 less people they're going to have to be responsible to support and to feed and to house and to provide energy to, because, I mean, aren't they going to feel some kind of responsibility? Probably not. But they should, right? I mean, but no, cynically, the more Ukrainians that die, the less they're going to have to, provide for when the war is over. It's insidious.
They won't provide for any. And I think, I made this prediction early. I think this was in March when I wrote on my blog on Reading Junkie that I think this will end like Afghanistan. And we forget Afghanistan ended with sanctions on Afghanistan. Because imagine if Ukraine capitulates, elects a different government.
Yeah.
What's Biden going to do? He can say, or whoever the president of the USA is at that moment, he'll just say, well, look, they elected an authoritarian pro-Russian puppet, and he can sanction him. He can seize whatever Ukrainian assets are in Western banks. They'll sanction Ukraine, cut it off from the EU and the USA. I think Ukraine, that's another bet. I do think this will end with Ukraine, whatever's left of Ukraine being sanctioned.
Well, that's a good perspective.
I still have time. We don't have to end on finishing.
Okay.
No, we don't.
I wanted to quote. I wanted
ahead.
to quote Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro on that very point. He said this at his speech. It was wonderful. It is not the first time that imperialism puts up a puppet, uses it, burns it, and throws it in the trash. We had a buffoon like Zelensky. Why though? Imperialism grabbed him and threw him on the trash heap in Miami. Direct quote from Nicolas Maduro on that point.
That was a good quote. Go ahead, Wouter.
But it's a good thought-provoking point that you make, Ian, because might that not be the best thing that could happen to Ukraine, that the ties are cut off to the West, that they just leave it as a junkyard, and it leaves, I mean, now I'm really jumping to conclusions, it leaves Russian influence a wide open road to clean up the mess, to demilitarize, denazify, and rebuild the country, and make Ukraine what it's supposed to be, a twin country.
Bring it back to its roots.
Yeah, back to the roots. I mean,
I wonder. I mean, on Ian's point on guerrilla warfare, I don't see a huge chance of that. I don't think Nazis were ever good at that. If you look at the resistance in France, in Yugoslavia, the anti-fascist resistance during World War II, they saw rape and pillage. That's why they had justice on their side. They're like the Gazans against Israel. That's what they were. Nazis never. The first thing Nazis did when they were faced with failure was flee, try to go to the UK so maybe they could get extradited to, South America or somewhere. I don't see any chance of that. And if you say this is going to go on for a year because they'll keep fighting, and my question is, who the fuck is going to keep fighting? The Poles, the Finns? Because
I agree with you. That the odds of guerrilla warfare, that there's a coherent guerrilla infrastructure, like the Taliban is. Even when the USA was still and ISAF were still in Afghanistan, Taliban was throughout that whole period, which is pretty amazing when you think about it, and a functioning government, even when they didn't control the actual government.
Yeah, when they weren't in Kabul.
So I don't see Ukraine without, I don't see that perfect storm of a huge amount of external support and a coherent infrastructure supporting a guerrilla movement. I don't see that happening. I think that's part of why there's so much money being thrown at Ukraine, because there's that understanding in the Pentagon and Washington that once the conventional war ends, that's it. So whatever they can squeeze out of this has to happen during the conventional war. So
I agree. It's Afghanistan all over. Yeah, I agree.
I hope
it's amazing to me that Ukrainians still bought onto it after Afghanistan. I think they say, oh, we're white, we're European. They won't screw us over like they screwed over Afghans. They couldn't be more wrong. That's what I think.
Yeah.
They're no difference than the Vietnamese, than Afghans, and Iraqis.
I think that people who publicly identify as I'm Taiwanese, not Chinese, should really take note of this. Yeah.
But for some reason they don't. I think and part of it is because of the corruption. Because yes, their leaders, the Zelenskys of the world, they know this, but they don't have skin in the game. They know they can go to Miami or London or wherever. So
they could be part of a government in exile. There's a billionaire in New York that calls himself the legitimate Chinese government in exile, and he's supported by Steve Bannon. He's got close ties with Steve Bannon. But they want to do the same thing in Ukraine. If they end up getting a government in power that has good relations with Russia, I mean, I'm thinking the U.S. is going to consider that government illegitimate, do the sanctions that we talked about, and then maybe, create a government in exile and run a low level insurgency. I don't think that's beyond the pale for as long as it can be beneficial to destabilizing that area, but. I don't think that's that big of a long shot.
What also could happen is then they send boots on the ground, because now we have someone that can be under control of Russia, of the Kremlin, and like they rushed into Germany at the end of the Second World War to claim a part of the territory, not let it be controlled totally by Russia, by the Soviets.
Yeah.
That could be a thing too, so that they can, take the big chunk out of it.
An airdrop supplies into a little enclave, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah.
Okay, guys, an hour and a half. Thank you very much, Ian, for joining us from Moscow. Wouter from Brussels. Ben from Peach.
Page.
Page.
Think of it as page. Yeah.
Page.
Page, but ending in a like a peach.
We hope to be back on Tuesday. Hopefully, Carlo is feeling better. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next week.